Kamagini. Hello, I'm Countess Shanaine. This is Adiraj Singh Devra, and this is Vineet Vyas.
Kamagini.
We're going to have an informal talk today on the sublime usage of iconography in the power and politics of South Asian painting, including Bikaner painting. So we've decided on a selection of paintings to discuss this very interesting topic. Usually when you have scholars or even collectors looking at miniature painting, they aren't actually dissecting the usage of the iconography or the reasons for it, including the decorative art, the weapons, the clothing, and other sublime messages that are within these paintings. We're going to start out with an opaque watercolor done by the last great master of the Bikaner tradition, which was Rahim Usta. To start with this painting by the Bikaner master, Rahim Usta, I will pass it over to the art scholar Vineet Vyas.
So what I find exciting about Rahim's painting is how he particularly eliminates all the background and focuses entirely on the figure. Apart from that, what you also see is he places the figure, who is much larger than the chair, on a chair which is European chair. And
Absolutely.
it also speaks to me how Rahim sees power even in this 19th century portrait. Apart from that, what I also find exciting is how he particularly makes sure that all the attributes, important attributes like the sword, the gun, and other typical attribute, which is the figure holding a rose, which is actually a sign of being a rasika or a connoisseur, is very distinctly portrayed.
Absolutely.
Yes. I also, to go further with what you were saying, the chair itself is also showing that the very long tradition of the different rulers of South Asia, whoever they may have been, the Kushans, the Rajputs, the Sultanates, as well as the Mughals, and then finally the British, where when they came into South Asia, they used the system that was already in place with the different regional darbars, different kingdoms, to also wield and show their power. So at this point, this European iconography of this chair is showing that that is where the power is, that European English superiority at that point in history, and how important that is to the power of this particular Raja, ruler, prince, and that is being portrayed here. As you pointed out, that the figure is larger than the chair also shows that his indigenous nature, that I am a king,
Exactly.
I am in power, and that may be part of the legitimization of myself, but I myself am a ruler.
To portray that how powerful is the kingdom is.
Yes.
That at the same time they are indulging with the European or colonial chair or attribution.
Yes. Now, what I also find interesting in this is that the local usage of traditional clothing.
Exactly.
This is just after Maharaja Gaj Singh's rule, where he had this kind of cultural revival. They went more back to the indigenous, more Rajput, away from the Mughal sensibilities. And so local clothing is portrayed, which is quite fascinating. And you see this also in other regional courts at this time as well. Adiraj Bana, I'd like you to go further into detail about the diplomacy, the iconography, and the use of this Olkan connoisseur message here with the flower.
See how elegantly the weapon, the talwar, and the gun both are placed at the same place. That shows the time. This shows that what was happening at that time in the history. That the involvement of Kanda and the hilt of Shamsher making a talwar and having the gun at the same time. The gun shows the colonial timing.
Absolutely, because otherwise you would have, traditionally you would have your qatar here, and now the qatar has been replaced with this colonial pistol.
Exactly. Keeping the roots, keeping the clothing, keeping the...
It's in the cummerbund, like you would have the qatar.
Everything keeping from the roots, and also involvement of the European seat.
I also find it very interesting that you've got, of course, the strands here.
Exactly.
You know, which is, of course, for
Holding the gun.
yes, and all of this. You know, quite fascinating. I'll ask Vinici here. I mean, what do you think about the gemstones around the neck? I mean, what do you find about that double strand? I mean, anything very interesting about the colonial period and why in a double strand?
Particularly, what I find more interesting is how Rahim plays an important role in brightening the color palette. So when
Okay.
you see comparatively to other Bikaneri paintings, this is much more brighter, and
Okay.
he involves. I mean, you can see a sense of three-dimensionality in how he portrays the necklaces, and also the way he's seated. He appears like a sahab, like a European sahab seated.
Yes.
But then again, he's not the European sahab. He's
Yes,
actually
the profile, very
exactly.
Desi,
Yes.
indigenous, local. But which gemstones would you both believe these are here in this strand?
I think so. These are green emeralds.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, they are emerald or panna.
Yeah, panna.
And this is not coming out of a Hindu tradition. So this is coming from the Muslim elite. Green is that color of Islam.
Exactly.
Emeralds became a predominant gemstone in use from the point of Muslims gaining power into South Asia. And the legitimizing of also Rajput rulers and also within the Persian court etiquette. That is also a symbol of power. We are also part of that power.
Right.
The other interesting thing I find of this point of the colonial period is a double strand is not a tradition of South Asia.
Yeah.
The double-stranded necklace is coming specifically out of the traditions of rulers in the United Kingdom. And so that double strand here, you will also see, it's very commonplace. Even Queen Elizabeth II today is wearing a double strand of basara moti, or natural pearls. That is again an iconography leaning us similarly to the chair iconography. Other things that I also find fascinating in this is that you do have a very traditional Bikaner Veden turban here. It is not following any other tradition or style, which becomes prevalent later. That still is completely local. Also fascinating. The gemstone and what's in the ear with the jewelry that you can see here, what would you say those are
Say
in
this
here?
red spinel with the basra moti.
Correct. So that's a lale badakhshan in Hindi, or the red gemstone of Badakhshan in present-day Afghanistan to the Tajikistan border. And historically, it was red spinel was the predominant red gemstone at royal courts. It was not what became ruby. That was arbitrarily done when gemology was formed as a science in the 19th century, where historically red spinels were the predominant gemstone, or let's say the rubies of history. Now, the Basra pearls here are natural pearls. And what's fascinating is that natural pearls were also a symbol of the Muslim elite. Two gemstones, the emerald and also the natural Basra pearls.
Also, one more thing, besides the beautiful jewelry and the mixture of the cultures,
Yes.
also I would like you to throw some light that what the flower mean in the second hand. What does it mean? What does it portrays to the all kingdoms?
So this flower is showing that an olkan, it is a connoisseur, it is a cultivated, cultured individual with vast knowledge and also power. With the weapons, the seating, I am a ruler. I am, very, very strong. I am dominant. I've got my weapons and all of this. My traditions, my sanskar, my power, everything is portrayed here.
Right.
This flower is showing also diplomacy. It is a peace offering. It is showing my intellect and my culture. But at the same time, with the other iconography, it is showing that do not underestimate me. Do not also try to overtake me. I am your equal. You are my equal for coming into court in a portrait or any interaction with other darbar or royal courts, including, let's say, at that point, the emperor and empress, which would be from the United Kingdom. So all of that is being shown with this simple gesture of a flower in the right hand.
Beautiful. And also, we should discuss some more paintings which were earlier than this,
Definitely,
so that
yes.
viewers will have a
Yeah.
Well, I would like to go further, if I may, Adi Rajbana and also Vinici, about the weapons and the symbols of that. How we brought in earlier with this is a European pistol replacing the Qatar, and now that we have this talwar, which the Kanda hilt. So a few more from Bikaner to go into detail. Yeah.
This is Raja Karan Singh Ji.
Okay.
So it's a.
And Karan Singh Ji would have been the son of Maharaja Rai Singh Ji and the father of Maharaja Anup Singh Ji in the mid 17th century.
Yeah, and it's a Siyahi Kalam, a portrait of Karan Singh Ji, and see how beautifully the weapons have been displayed, have been made. On the one hand, it had the proper traditional Rajput kandha in the front, and on the side you can see the shamsher, which comes from the Mughal.
Yes.
So it's a combination, and also showing the time that when Karan Singh Ji was ruling, he was also he made agreement with the Mughal Darbar, that showing the both cultures in a same portrait.
And I would also then suggest then, or it's probably possible that by showing this is the local, let's say Rajput, my Darbar, my kingdom, I've aligned myself with your kingdom, and both powers are being shown in
and apart from that, it's very interesting to see that his tilak, or the religious mark on the forehead, makes it very stark that yes, I am a Hindu devotee.
Yes.
And more overall, what I find interesting about this composition is that it's a sketch. So what it does, it gives an idea about the artistic process of the painter. So what it throws light on is that such portraits were copied, were repeated, and they were made into multiple, say, dynastic portraits, which would be then used for propaganda or otherwise. So that sort of gives an idea into the artistic psyche and how they repeatedly practiced again and again and copied many sketches so that they could actually either honor the master and also understand how a composition plays a role.
Yes.
And
yes, please, Bana.
Also, how the artist made his king as a demigod.
Yes.
Also to throw on
you mean
throw
like
light.
the halo
Yeah,
and
the halo.
this circle here, halo, showing the divinity, the divine right to rule. So with Kshatriyas around the world, that the power that we have is also sanctioned by God.
Exactly.
Yes. Another thing I find fascinating is this pendant here. So these are Basaramoti, even though they're only drawn, we know those are Basaramoti. But this specific stylization is Bikaner. And the back of these would have been the Bikaner Meenakari, or the enameling of that. And the top of those would have been Kundan, which is the Bikaneri Kundan. So even though we can't actually know this, we do know that from our own knowledge of the jewelry and the stylizations and clothing of Bikaner. So that's also showing I am a Bikaner ruler as well. Another thing I think is very interesting is, of course, the gagra. So historically, you'd have an 80-fold gagra. And it wasn't until late 19th century that it moved to, you've got the jodhpurs or the, this type of clothing. It was traditionally even the men wore the gagra, which I would like to see more of. Yes, all of you Rajput men, return to gagras. But that's a very, very fascinating thing. You also have the cummerbund, you have the sashes, but one thing I find very interesting is in this particular portrait, you do not have any of the ceremonial use of textiles on the weapons. It is very, very sharp, showing that this is my power base. There is no ceremonial showing of these weapons in this portrait.
For the war.
And it is for war. And at this point, of course, Bikaner was aligned with the Mughals to get the Deccan. There was almost a century of those type of fighting. The ceremonial is not present in this particular portrait.
And also, it's a very formal portrait. It's not an informal portrait.
No.
So it's a very typical, idealized, yet somewhere in the middle, idealized or realistic, somewhere in the middle, wherein you have, every part plays a certain role. You have the halo, you have weapons, and he stands in a very formal posture, which also gives an idea that this is not an informal but a formal portrait.
Yes. Other examples of going into the weapons and that type of iconography and jewelry. So
This is Raja Shur Singh Ji.
Sur Singh Ji,
And
acha.
what are the difference between Karan Singh Ji's portrait and Shur Singh Ji's portrait? Definitely the halo. And it is a demigod, and the artist is giving respect to the king. And again, you can see a beautiful Qatar in the kamarband.
Yes, so the Qatar is very prevalent here, very
Exactly.
noticeable. You don't have the Qatar here.
But it's very noticeable here. Also the bajubands, which were not in the Karan Singh Ji's portrait.
Yes.
So showing that Bikaner is getting more powerful financially and militarily.
Yes.
That this portrait is showing it very
Clearly. And you've got the Kanda that's here, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And you've got the Shamsher that is coming be just behind Sur Singh Ji. And so this is a very, very, again, militaristic, but you're also seeing interesting things like, for example, here within this cummerbund is again a militarily cummerbund. It's got Zardozi, it have embroidery on it, but very decorative, but also showing wealth and power.
Exactly.
Which is missing at this point. Here's far more simple. You've got just the clothing and that iconography, and here is, again, like you said, it is starting to show that amount of power, wealth, and influence.
Exactly.
And compositionally, this is much more delicate than the other one, wherein you see his mustache and a very light beard, very sensitively rendered. And apart from that, one thing I find very interesting is how he flips the figure. Basically, here the figure sees the left, and here the figure sees the right. So basically, although he's just flipped it, but of course he's done much more than just flipping the figure, because he's added much more details and much more jewelry to make the portrait more realistic. And he uses the same red color to paint the lips, to paint the tilak, and also what is this gemstone called in the middle?
The middle gemstone? It's actually
this in the earring.
Oh, that's a red spinel.
Red spinel,
A lot of people- I'm actually wearing a spinel today. So that's a 13 karat gray spinel, which is the rarest color in spinel. This one's Burmese. But the spinels historically were coming from Afghanistan-Tajikistan border. So yes, that's the red spinel, which is also a traditional Rajput gemstone that was used for power, for influence. It was considered the most expensive gem, actually, in any Rajput court historically, was the red spinel.
And also one more thing I want to put the light, that maybe at that time there was very friendly connections with Mughal Darbar. That's why in this Shamsher you don't see any ceremonial cloth, but in this Shamsher there is a ceremonial cloth, which showing that this Shamsher is a ceremonial.
Okay.
And that means that time Mughal Darbar and Bikaner kingdom was attached on a height.
I also wanted just one more thing, getting to the mojaris down here at the bottom. The same thing that Vineet Ji, you pointed out. Here they're very simple fare, very simple. And again, here they're getting very decorative. You can see that that even though this is only in Sia Kalam, you can see the ornateness and that it's brocaded with lots of decoration as well. So now going a little bit earlier in the history, the earlier 17th century portrait of Maharaja Rai Singh Ji. And what's fascinating about this one, I find interestingly enough, is that there are no weapons portrayed. And it was very rare to have any weapons portrayed with Maharaja Rai Singh. He was established deeply with both Emperor Akbar and then later Emperor Jahangir.
Exactly.
And he was the individual who aligned himself with other intellectuals and great connoisseurs, Jahangir, the Mughal emperor, Rao Boj Singh Ji of Bundi.
And the Khani Khanan Rahim of Akbar.
Yes, who was a great poet as well, great influence, power, a Khan in his own right. And so there was no need for showing that military iconography. My power of who I am is enough alone.
And he looks very much similar to Mota Raja, the very famous Jodhpur king, Mota Raja Uday Singh.
Yes,
and interestingly, what we see is what is traditionally referred to as Chakdar Jama, which is four-fold robe, which is very distinctly portrayed.
Beautiful, right.
Yes, beautiful. Yes. Also, this cummerbund that he would be wearing would be very finely done in a silk and gold brocade. That brocade would have been done within the Gujarat Sultanate, which Maharaja Rai Singh actually became the Subedar in Gujarat once it was taken by Akbar. And just to throw light on something else interesting at that point, the Buland Darwaza, which is in Fatehpur Sikri, is the world's tallest gate. When it was built, and still today, India, we have the tallest gate in the world. And that had very much to do with Maharaja Rai Singh getting that for the Mughal Empire as well. So the next one, let's see, I'll let you go into further detail.
It's the portrait of Maharaja Anup Singh Ji, the son of Maharaja Karan Singh Ji and the grandson of Maharaja Rai Singh Ji.
Yes.
So he was a great patronage.
And I find at this point very interesting the use of the different weapons, the doll. You know, can you go into detail?
It was getting more decorative, more wealthy. The kingdom was getting more wealthy as well as more power from the empire. So you can see here, have the shamsher, have the qatar, have the dhal, and also shield, and also at the same time rose, which again portraying.
And you can see the qatar that is actually stuck in this point.
Yes.
Just behind. The other interesting thing, comparing it to the first portrait of the Raja that is done by Rahim, that has the two strands. Here we are back to the South Asian sanskar tradition of three strands. Instead of the two strands, which are shorter, very European. This is very indigenous, very South Asian. The other thing that I think is interesting about Maharaja Anup Singh Ji and looking at this portrait is when he came to power, he was first opposed to Emperor Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb's policies were very different than his great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his father. And so at first, Maharaja Anup Singh was in opposition of that. Maharaja Rai Singh Ji got the first title of Maharaja as a hereditary title. And then you go back to Rao between. It wasn't until Maharaja Anup Singh that title became hereditarily permanent. And he then did finally align himself with Aurangzeb. So this portrait is also not just showing that I'm the ruler of Bikaner. I have this wealth, I have this power, I have this, this influence. It is also that I am your equal.
Exactly.
And you can see all of that in all these details.
And I think overall this portrait is comparatively to what the other portraits we looked at. This is much more dynamic.
Yes.
And
exactly.
Way more detailed than what we saw. So here it's, I think, not just flaunting of power, but also wealth and how wealthy the kingdom has become by this time.
Yes. I also find it quite interesting that he is portrayed here holding for what would be a sarpesh, or what goes into the turban. So he is also, this iconography is exceptionally important because it isn't I've just got this flower, I'm at this diplomatic thing and I'm at your equal, whatever else. No, I am holding a sarpesh. Yeah, so it's showing that my sarpesh, is power. It goes into my crown. It goes into my turban. I am the king of Bikaner. Yes, it is showing all of this, which is exceptionally important to show his power position.
And also these were, giving or gifting a sarpech was a very important, or it was a very prestigious gift to receive. So, in the sense that holding a sarpech in the hand, and at times we have paintings from Kishangarh and otherwise wherein you see that a ruler is giving or gifting sarpech to others. So that is an honor, wherein this painter again highlights that now we have, it's changed from weapons or a rose or a flower to sarpech.
And to go further, Adirajbana, about the sarpesh would also be accompanied by the turban.
Exactly.
The turban would be also part of that gift entourage. Can you go further into detail about that reasoning for the turban being given as a gift.
I think so. According to the history and the manuscripts, the gifting turban and the serpage is the highest level of nazar you can give.
An honor, respect.
It is an honor. So showing this serpage in the hand, also making it more powerful, more aesthetically great. That how the turban is on Maharaja Anup Singh Ji, but the serpage is in the hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
To go further on weapons, I find this next painting quite interesting. This is a Bikaner portrait. It is third quarter or so of the 18th century. And if you could go into detail a little bit about this khanda and the weapons and either one.
Yeah.
I am not the expert on the weapons things, just the beautiful decoration of them.
Again, this painting shows the age, influence, and the power with the weapons. You can see a beautiful koftgari gold shamsher on the back.
So the koftgari is that engraving, let's say, that's embedded with gold or silver, either one,
exactly.
inside of damask steel. And also to know, and all these weapons we're speaking about, the shamshers, the khanda, the qatar, all of these are made with damask steel. The finest centers, you had Isfahan and Shiraz in Iran, you had Herat in Afghanistan, you had Lucknow in India, you had Sirohi in Rajputana, producing these amazing high-level damask steel weapons. So all of these weapons would be made with the damask steel.
Definitely, and also showing that how wealthy was the kingdom. See the kandha, the top, the hilt of the kandha is fully koftgari with the kundan.
Yes.
You can see all the gemstones.
It's kind of a South Asian system of half cutting diamonds. And you would then have a traditional silver foil below the diamond set into a setting that reflects with that silver. Contemporary now, a lot of the time there's gold considered better, which is not traditional. It's actually better to use the silver buttock behind the diamonds.
Exactly. Right.
And then you have a closed setting that has lock embedded inside. And then you embellish your objects with this kundan of different gemstones. Red spinel, Lali Badakhshan historically, Hira, which became more popular later, not earlier in South Asian tradition.
And what colors and what are the fabrics and what are the metals which we were unable to see in the siyahi clumps?
Yes.
It is easily visible here that the Basra Moti strands.
The 3-dimension of them is too.
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
Vineet, you can go more into detail on
Yes.
that.
Particularly what's striking to me is how the painter very delicately shows, I think probably through very delicate process of applying paint in a way wherein you have a sense of 3-dimensionality.
Many layers of that gouache.
Yes, absolutely. And here what I find now the painting, now what we have come from is from a sketch to a finished portrait. So
Yes,
what
an
we have
opaque
is
watercolor with mineral colors
Yes.
and vegetable colors.
so we have a very radiant halo. So it's very striking. It's very
Yes.
clear, and it's very clearly speaking to us that okay, I am a very
Exactly.
powerful ruler. Apart from that, the painter adds other details
The halo
wherein
here, yeah.
yes, and then he also adds a sense of rough background. So he gives a sense of ground where the Maharaja is standing, and apart from that, a sort of a general background of a sky. But what particularly excites me is how he focuses entirely on the portrait. So although the background might appear a bit pale or very striking green, but the painter absolutely makes such efforts that the viewer is not allowed, basically the viewer is not distracted. The viewer
Yes.
absolutely wants to focus
Exactly.
on the portrait.
I also find it interesting that the fabric that the Maharaja is wearing here is an exceptionally fine muslin. So that's a mulmul. And you can see from all these really fine folds, the way this in the 80-fold gagra is done, you understand that that is a muslin. And also at that point, even in this iconography, muslin, the cotton was the finest fabric of any cottons. It was already a symbol. It was already a status symbol. Yes, to have that level of of mulmul or muslin being worn. The other interesting thing I find is the meenakari. This whole border is with meenakari, with the koftkari, and then it is completely surrounded. All of this is basaramuti, natural pearls. Every
Exactly.
single detail. Here at the bottom of the kanda, here with the shamsher, right here is the shamsher with those, it's bordered with natural pearls. You have pure gold koftkari, you have gemstones just dripping off of him.
Also, the same thing with the footwear.
Definitely, there are pearls, natural pearls. Basaramotis are decorating the tips of his shoes. You have beautiful lapis lazuli. You've got gold. You have exceptionally fine silk. You have gold here at the bottom of his chodidar. All of these details that show exceptionally how powerful and wealthy he is.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the next painting, just to go further into these kind of details, is another Bikaner painting. This is again, interestingly enough, this is exactly at the point of Maharaja Gaj Singh Ji's revival of a more indigenous or Rajput style. You have these great painters at the time. The one in charge of the Royal Workshop was Isa. You also had Sahabuddin, his cousin, and this is Hassan. So these great painters that took up this stylization to become more Rajput at that period, mid-18th century, it kind of declined, and then it under Maharaja Gaj Singh Ji really brought the Bikaner tradition back up to this exceptionally high level. You can also see the usage of the pigments, the quality of the pigments, the detail, the refinements, the layers. It's already showing even in the materials of the painting that we are a very superior power. We have the wealth, we have the time, we have the connoisseurship to understand and patron this level of painting. So even that's prevalent even just in the materials.
Yeah, and of course, the attendants add to the drama of
Definitely.
it might be a hunt scene or maybe a battle scene.
A possession.
Yeah. So wherein what we see is a range of attendants holding different attributes. One of them is even fanning. And compared to the other painting, what we see is much more severe interest in the backdrop.
Yes.
So you have a layer wherein the painter is giving us an idea about a sense of three-dimensionality and depth about where the Maharaja is seated on the horse, and also a sense of dusk wherein you have a sky, wherein orange sky, which again portrays either dawn or dusk. And apart from that, he's seated on a very elegantly dressed horse. So horse also, again, you would know more, horse plays a very important role in Rajput court culture.
Which comes in really actually closer to the end of the Rajput period is when you get the horses coming in. I was more with the Sultanates and then the Mughals and that. But interestingly, the Rajputs took a hold of that. They bred their own horses until they had the Marwari horse. So they took it in many ways one step further, that this is now part of our tradition, our darbar.
Embedded it.
And interestingly, you do see earlier portraits, at least for Bikaner, where in the 17th century, you are not seeing the horse portrayed as part of that iconographic power.
No.
Yes, but at the 18th century, you start to see equestrian portraits becoming very prevalent, also showing that horse, that refinement, that symbolism of power, of war, of divinity and everything else, where the horse then becomes attached to that symbolism.
In one way it is a wealth, but it's more showing the power. It's more showing that now the kingdoms, the Rajput kingdoms, have the horses and we are breeding it, and also portraying Maharaja on the top of the horse, also showing that the horse, we are sitting on the horse.
Yes. Yeah. Now, interesting, speaking about turbans and iconography, this particular turban, or the ferin for Bikaner, became very, very prevalent at this point of, let's say, under Maharaja Gaj Singh. And that was his turban style. So you're dealing from like the 1750s to the late 1770s or so, where you see that style very prevalent in Bikaner. You have the earlier traditional style of Bikaner ferin in this attendant. So that's also showing that linkage or that genealogy of that migration between the two.
Who is higher and who is
also very fascinating.
Yeah. And something more exciting is that clearly he's controlling the horse.
Yes,
Exactly,
absolutely. No,
Absolutely.
yeah,
He's-
definitely.
He's
That-
definitely in control, and he holds the spear in a very, like, he holds it in a very upper side, wherein he's very
Yeah.
much declaring that, I'm in
Yeah.
control of everything.
Yes,
and
yeah.
I'm the king.
Yes, definitely. I would say the procession is more of a regalia, more of a procession doing something important. We are going to some important function. The
Exactly.
Maharaj is there. Again, with the fanning, you have the one who's holding the staff here, which is, of course, announcing and showing that the ruler is
Ceremonial
coming.
possession.
This is that's showing that. And interestingly, also, at this point when we're speaking about the shamsher, or today often what is a shamsher people are calling talwars,
Talwars.
which is a little bit of a misnomer really, but it has
Exactly.
become very prevalent just to say that's a talwar. But anyway, at that point, that permeation coming out of more Persianate culture becomes also prevalent in Rajputan. You start to see the disappearance of the Kanda. And so even though this is a cultural revival for Bikaner and feeling that it is more indigenous, it's more Rajput, those type of elements have become permanent part of the Rajput Darbar and culture, and they do go forward. So I think that's interesting as well.
And also after this revival,
Yes.
how Bikaner believed in gender equality.
Well, I would say, yes, at this point, I would say that it was already there.
It
I
was
mean,
there.
the Bikaner Darbar, interestingly, compared to other Darbars, historically within Rajput Darbars, you did have a very balanced equality between the genders. You had a little change of this, of course, with the introduction of Purda, for different reasons, coming from, at the end of the Rajput period into the Sultanate and the Mughal periods.
Definitely.
But Bikaner itself had a darbar that was very general equal.
Exactly.
And fascinating compared to other Rajput schools.
And also,
You have the portrayal of women. So this is, early 18th century. It's what is more following the Kishingar style. We do know this was done in Bikaner for different reasons, even though it's looking more Kishingari. But Nur Jahan, who was, of course, an empress, it's a very popular portraiture that was done of her. But what's interesting, when we were speaking about iconography and women's power and all of that, here we are seeing her drinking wine.
Yeah.
That's already a great message,
that's also believing into the Ilahi concept.
Yes, that the Din Ilahi, that religious equality that Akbar introduced to have a new religion, which was combining Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Jainism.
And from earlier time also Bikaner was following the system, and also the gender equality. You can see very, very, very clearly in this portrait that how one hand is holding the wine decanter and the other hand is holding the wine glass, and the Nur Jahan is jeweled in the Hindu and Islamic gemstone ideas.
Also, I find it interesting, speaking of Purda at this point, not just with some of the Mughal royalty, but definitely more, we'll get into Bikaner in a moment, is that you have this really fine silk organza, which is covering here. And there isn't any type of, I need to be in Purda or whatever else. What do you see in the portrait,
and
Viniji?
also, apart from that, I think stylistically, I find it interesting how Bikaneri painters are, virtually interacting with Kishangarhi painters, wherein they're imbibing their visual language in their atelier, and then how they reuse them. So they're not simply copying. It also shows that the process is much more complex. They are more interested to
that intellectual exchange, recreate,
Absolutely.
adopt, borrow from each other.
Learn things, not being in the egoistic.
There we are. And that sharing of knowledge was quite common between these different ateliers and traditions. There was this thought process earlier among scholarship where there wasn't an exchange of ideas and information when there was so much of it going on. I also think that it's fascinating that she is wearing a turban.
Yes.
And you do have so many examples earlier of both Mughal as well as Rajput women wearing a turban for that status, for that power, and how that has almost completely, or if not completely, disappeared at that time. Another one to go over, which I think is interesting, is speaking about how different Bikaner was in that gender equality within the Darbar is it's very common to find 17th century Bikaner paintings, see a column, also from the Karkhana. This is from the actual workshop of the Royal Karkhana. And here you see a woman who's a royal. She's from the Darbar, and you've got this Raja behind here. They're hunting chinkara or Indian gazelle, and she's in the front. Her hair is open.
Exactly.
She's hunting. Yes, and this is an actual portrait of a royal woman at the time, and this was quite common.
Exactly, and I would like to ask Vineet ji to what do you think? What is your explanation, visualization for this painting? If you can throw some.
What I find exciting by now time is that what we have is the sketch actually has that drama, that ecstasy of hunt about how you chase an animal and kill it down. And here, as you pointed out, the woman heads the hunt, and she's ahead of the man, which particularly also and not just she's ahead of it. She doesn't have, as you said, she's totally they're totally in the scene. We can feel how they're totally going ahead, and she holds a spear in one hand and another through a strap. Probably she's holding the neck of the chinkara, wherein she's the one who
with
is
her bow.
Yes,
I think her bow is what's been thrown ahead. It's her
like
bow. She's got the arrow in her hand, but she doesn't need. She is a powerful woman. She doesn't need the arrow to hunt it down. She throws her bow over the neck of the chinkara and pulls it in for the hunt.
Exactly.
I think particularly also about how delicately the painter renders it in such a small. It's a sketch which is tiny. So within that space, how the painter is actually able to achieve. If you see in the front, which is almost kind of partially done, is another chinkara sort of jumping ahead, and that again, that is just fascinating to me. How painters have this power over a line. Over their paintbrush.
That siyahi line and siyakalam. So an interesting thing, if you see other painting schools, Rajput courts or whatever else, of course you have women in them.
Exactly.
And you have a lot of that in Mughal painting and Rajput painting. And we do have specific individuals and all of that. But often you have the painter where those women weren't actually present. They are painting what they believe to be, almost a fantasy. And in some cases they're painting the actual women, but often it is that fantasy of what's the zanana. What is going on at the Darbar.
Because
this is the scene that happened because they've never seen these women. Where in Bikaner, we know as a fact that the Bikaner painters had access to the royal women. The royal men and the aristocracy allowed that, encouraged it, was okay with that. And though these pieces were kept in the Karkhana like this one, or the ones that went to the Darbar, and that wasn't general public knowledge, within that whole world, it was acceptable to portray our women in this way. We believe them in this way. They are an equal.
That already shows the superiority and the open-mindedness of the kingdom.
Yes, so that's something very specific I really endear to Bikaner for as well. So the last painting that we've got to discuss today among us is this portrait of the goddess Lakshmi Ji, and she's being bathed by elephants. And this is a very common iconography that you see between kingdoms, but Lakshmi Ji is the goddess of the Bikaner state. This one again is about the third quarter of the 18th century. And we do know that this particular painting was in the Junagadh fort.
For the
it
Lakshmi
was
Puja.
Used for Lakshmi Puja. It has a likakar, which is the writing here, that it was given as a nazar, which is unwavering loyalty and respect. For Diwali. And then placed in Junagadh Fort. It was also in the royal collection, and then it was sold by Maharaja Karni Singh Ji in an auction in 1964.
I think what's more, I mean, speaking of Nazar, that's something which has been my favorite topic. So I think Nazar, this is something which is very particular to Bikaner, wherein in Bikaner there's a development of tradition of what we call as Nazar paintings, wherein the painters would give this as a gift. So they would even even like as you pointed out on the back, you have an inscription wherein we have the name of the artist, and it says Nijar, which is a Rajasthani term for nazar. So wherein the painter is actually gifting this to the Maharaja, and not just it was not just a random gift. This was particularly on Diwali, so it would have specific occasions, and more specifically there was a way to gift it to the Maharaja, that the painter would first of all hold it like this, and then he would actually wait for his turn, and on this painting there would be a transparent white cloth put, and then slowly he would once his turn comes, he would go to the Maharaja, bow down, and then gift it in the form of nazar. So what you have is, this is a Lakshmi painting. There are many Krishna paintings of Krishna nazar paintings, wherein
Yes.
because Bikaner rulers were also majorly also Vaishnavites, so they also got many Krishna paintings, nazar paintings made. And interestingly, what I also find is this whole idea of gifting a painting is, it might seem new, but back then we have very detailed information about Bikaner specifically, that after gifting this, the Maharaja would be sometimes so happy that he would give even land or a lot
Yes.
of gold coins as a
Yes.
as a
Presently known
reward.
as Gajdars.
Yes, now amazingly, with the Usta artisans of Bikaner, yes, they were allowed to come into the Darbar in the court when
Yeah.
even members of different Thakurs, yes, were not allowed into the Darbar without appointment. They could come into the Darbar without that. Large land grants and privileges were given. We were speaking, I'll just bring this up again. This one was done, attributed to Natuji, who was the contemporary of Ruknuddin, probably Bikaner's most famous painter. And Ruknuddin was in charge of the Royal Karkhana painting workshop here in the latter part of the 17th century. And Natuji went on campaigns with the Maharajas. Now, Natuji was so favored by the royal family that a gift was given to him after Nazar of 2,000 bighas of land. Yes, for his loyalty and his art contribution and that culture to Bikaner. So that's also fascinating, that exchange, not just from the artisans to the court, but the court back to the artisans as well. Another interesting thing about the Nazar system, in Bikaner, when a Nazar portrait was given, you'd have the masters of the Karkhana in a particular time. And they're getting to the point where the next generation of master artisans were coming along.
Exactly.
And they wanted to introduce that into the court. They would also give paintings done by these
the
new
new-
masters.
Okay.
Yeah. And then they would present that so that they were also recognizable in court. And then the royals and the Darbar would okay, I like the paintings of such and such and such. And that would pull them to be prominent masters within the Royal Karkhana as well.
And to add one more point, of course, in South Asia, we did not have the so-called concept of genius as a separate,
Yes.
individual
It was
artist.
collective.
So,
That's
unlike
correct.
other Bikaneri or any other paintings, Nazar paintings stand out because those are done by only one artist.
Yes.
So that makes it very clear and special that it's a sort of a personal gift
Exactly.
given by the
It isn't
artist
the
to the Maharaja.
collective, yes, because again, when you have many other traditions in the world,
Yeah.
it is about that individualism, that representation, that ego of the artist itself, where historically in the Persian world and the South Asian world is the collective. We find far more representation and proof of who painted what, within the Karkhana pieces, because those notes were kept as a record for the next generation of artisans. Then you can actually find at court, but because of the Nazar paintings and such, we do have a very good record in Bikaner of individual artists presenting that Nazar to the Darbar.
And to point out a technical detail is that when you sort of even flip this painting a bit, you can see the gold very clearly shine.
Exactly.
yes.
So, the artist makes very clear that, he wants the Maharaja to focus on the Lakshmi, who is seated in the center. So, also the composition is very symmetrically well arranged. She's exactly in the middle and they're flanked by two elephants. So, also he's very careful about how he's rendering it
Exactly.
overall because he knows he has to gift it to the Maharaja.
And an interesting thing, this this iconography of Lakshmi being bathed by elephants is quite prevalent, with Lakshmi being the goddess of the Bikaner state. So you see a lot of lesser quality paintings that are rendered from all periods. This particular painting, even though it's a very common subject, and looking at it just quickly, it seems that, it's like others. But if you look in detail, you will see that it's very refinedly done, exceptional attention to detail, and again, as Viniji was saying, and Adirajbana, that this was given to a king. Yes, it needed to be that level as well.
Also, personally, what I feel in this painting or these type of paintings, that according to the present scenario, how people relate the religions. So if we go in the history, this painting was given by Usta
A Muslim.
to king, and which
Who was Hindu.
who was Hindu, which automatically shows the how the versatility of the religion in the kingdom, how
Absolutely.
beautifully it was played with, and also you see many Krishna paintings and Ras Leela paintings, Ramayana, all painted by Muslim painters, and above all, I think
Rahim
so,
designing for the Karnimata temple.
Exactly. Above all, Rahim was the one who designed the
present Karnimata temple. Yeah.
And so that relations between the religions
Absolutely.
was very
A
beautifully
beautiful neutrality and understanding of culture, of intellectualism together.
Exactly.
You were speaking earlier, Viniji, about the different Jain patronage in Bikaner, as well as Srinathji.
Yes. So particularly what's also interesting is how there is enormous amount of Jain manuscript of, say, Kalpasutra, and other manuscripts are being made. Apart from that, although little, but we do have a few Srinathji or Vaishnavite Krishna in the form of Srinathji paintings extensively painted in Bikaner. So what it also shows is that the Muslim artists are actually open to commission. They are working for everyone, for that matter.
Yes.
And these are done for the royal patrons, but the Jains were merchants. So overall they were active everywhere, and we know that only because we have exceptional amount of records and signatures which were also done by the painters, which throw much more light on Bikaner school than any other school for that matter.
And I've seen beautiful series, and so has Adi Rajbana, of Jain series of beautiful paintings done by Usta artisans as well. Also Srinathji. There's a beautiful neem column, so a half-colored one, and a Sia column in a private collection that I've seen, which was done by the Usta master Muradji, and it is of a Jain saint. He's got the mulmul over his face. Yes, it's beautifully rendered. And here it is again, that interaction between the religions and cultures without any confrontation.
You're absolutely right. There was no confrontation. They were open to all the religions. They were open to for the work, for the love for the art. Everyone, even the patrons and even the artists, everyone was working for the love of art.
Yes. Well, I've so much enjoyed this conversation. I hope our viewers have too.
Exactly.
And that they've learned something interesting about the iconography usage in South Asian painting and Bikaner. Yes.
Thank you for giving this opportunity.
It was such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. Kamagini.